Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, AmTrust Title, Customers Bank, Ariel Property Advisors, Capital One Bank, Sterling National Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Meridian Capital Group. Additional funding has been provided by grants from Amarant Bank, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, B6 Real Estate Advisors, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Citizens Bank, Collins Building Services, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Matone Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, RPW Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merringore Family Foundation, and these friends. You know, sometimes my crystal apple says, I want to own rental regulated property. But now today, with the new change in government and other areas, I'm not certain that everybody wants to own rental apartments. So today I've assembled this group of leaders to talk about what's happening in the rental marketplace, what their thoughts are, and what they project for the end of all of 2019. My guests, they include Joseph Pistelli, Chairman and CEO of Pistelli Realty, and on the other side of the coin, Chairman of the Board of First Central Savings Bank. Vic Sozio, who is a principal at Ariel Property Advisors. And last but not least, Frank Korzakwinski, who is the Senior Executive Vice President for Real Estate at Flushing Bank. So you have a double side. You're an owner and you're a banker.
Yes.
What are the proposed for the rental regulated apartments in the city of New York? Because people hear about it, but no one's really spoken about it, not in an inside baseball way, but in an actual way, what's happening with preferential rents, you know, MCI improvements and so on. Joe?
Well, I think that from right now it's all hearsay. You know, this is what's being shuffled around on the table by our elected officials on how they see our industry being molded somewhat differently. I think on that note of being molded somewhat differently, it's not something for the first time that we're seeing. Our industry has always been in the forefront of changes and how regulations should change and the relationship between the owners of properties and the tenants and the city itself. But I think with that being said, some of the things that we're talking about today are really changing the elements that have brought New York City housing back. Made it strong, made it a desirable place to live, made people from other cities and states move to New York City. And that's because crime is down. That's because the housing was a better stock by what property owners did. So changing the vacancy decontrol, which is what they're talking about, will affect some boroughs, will have no effect on other boroughs.
Would you explain, you know, for the general public who viewed the show, what is vacancy decontrol? What are these terminologies that we're bringing out?
This vacancy decontrol is that apartments that reach, I believe it's $27.75 as a rent, you can decontrol that apartment and go to fair market rent. It's also known as luxury decontrol. So that's one component that would affect apartments in Manhattan, for sure. Apartments in lower income areas of the boroughs probably would not see much effect there. But I think in areas such as Brooklyn, which has had a very large revitalization of its neighborhoods, and Queens, that is something that would definitely change the environment of certain neighborhoods. They're talking about getting rid of multiple major capital improvements. Major capital improvements falls on two sides of the fence. It falls on an individual apartment as well as a building-wide. So if you improve the building in its public areas and its outside facade, you're able to increase the rent by that.
Over a period of time.
Over a period of time. And the same formula is if you wanted to remodel inside an apartment to raise the rent. Or just remodel the apartment without raising the rent because the apartment needs it. And you have to do work to maintain and preserve the housing stock and the investment you have. Not only do you have to do it, banks require that the properties look and are maintained a certain way. The government requires.
Right, so I'm going to ask Frank, you as a bank who has a significant portion of your loans in multifamily, what effect is what Joe is talking about having on the underwriting or in your plans for 2019 lending?
Well, I think the biggest challenge we see really stems from the challenges that the property owners have to increase rents. We've gone through a number of years now, 3 or 4 years, that we've had 1.5% rental increases, and we've seen operating expenses increase significantly, particularly real estate taxes.
We had zero as well.
Water charges, and without the ability to have at least some adjustments based on the cost of the operations of the business, makes it very challenging for lenders to produce new loans in communities that actually need them. It's making it difficult for owners to borrow the money to invest in the properties. So we're really kind of just trying to keep a real close ear to the ground on what's happening, where they're going with the annual increases, the MCIs, which was a really valuable component of the real estate business in the last 30 years. And understand there's a lot of resistance to allow that program to continue for the owners to invest in the buildings. So we just have a little bit of a cautious eye to make sure.
But you know, when we take stock, which is around in certain boroughs dating back to 1920, 1930, okay, you know, the improvements, I mean, you need these major capital improvements. You have to put them into the building. And then you have certain things like Local Law 11 where you have to take care of the facade, which is another expense which is above and beyond. It has to be passed through one way or the other. The owner can't do it. I'm not trying to say the owner is burdened all the time, but these burdens are over there. What effect do you see this on sales?
So as it relates to the multifamily product, which has a high percentage of stabilized units that are deeply stabilized, it's certainly causing some concern, or I would say hesitation, from capital sources and groups that have traditionally gone to secure these properties and that have employed a value add type of execution. To take it a step further, what we didn't touch on, so we have the vacancy decontrol, we have the elimination of the ability to trigger legal when you have a pref rider. They're also talking about completely eliminating a vacancy increase, which I look upon that as being, you know, very significant.
Would you explain what that means?
So a vacancy increase essentially allows, upon turnover and vacancy of a unit, you add a 20% to the legal rent before you even start putting money into the unit to get your IAI increases above and beyond that. So to take something like that from 20 to 0 overnight, in my opinion, is a very severe adjustment, and too severe of an adjustment. And similar to kind of the overarching theme, I guess, is that it could be counterproductive to what they're looking to achieve, right? And in fairness, and we spoke about this before the show, I do think that some of the objectives behind the legislation or proposed legislation have merits, right? Since 2010, average rents in the city have increased over 30%. Wages have not kept pace. So there is an affordability crisis. However, I don't think that this is the way to do it, and I think what they're lacking right now is communication from the stakeholders, from
Now,
both
Frank
property
was
owners
also
and
talking
tenants.
about some of these ground groups, let's say, these community-based groups, are also having an effect on the rental world.
I think that there's a new game in town with respect to community-based groups, and I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure in the industry, as well as in the banking industry, to pay attention to what's going on in these particular groups. Obviously, as a community bank, and Joe knows this well, we invest in our communities, where our customers are, where the businesses are. We want to make sure that things are functioning well and prospering. But there has been a tremendous amount of activist attention going on, particularly when it comes to rent-stabilized housing. I think that there are some interesting lists that are being created and sponsored through local governments targeting landlords and buildings. That poses a little bit of a challenge for a financial institution, because you want to try and work as best you can with your landlords and try not to end up on any of these lists of so-called troubled landlords or speculative buildings. If you're not familiar with a particular operator, maybe taking a little bit more risk than you think from a community standpoint.
You know, the population's increasing. More people are coming here. New York City is becoming the tech capital of the world. You have Google expanding, Amazon, Netflix. All these companies are expanding and they need housing. Let's talk about how we're creating housing. Vic?
I'm a believer that the only way that we can truly serve or satisfy the demand that the city's having, especially for certain AMI bands, is to build out of it. So one of the programs that I actually do think makes a lot of sense that was introduced over the past few years is MIH, Mandatory Inclusionary Housing. And we've seen it in the East Harlem rezoning, in the Inwood rezoning. They're introducing it to the major developments that are happening on Cherry Street. It's happening in East New York. And essentially what that mandates that is if you build in that area, they will give you added density in return for permanent affordable housing of about 25%, blending at a 60% AMI band. So I believe that is something that they can utilize going forward to help kind of serve.
Now, is the housing on-site or is it off-site, or is it both?
It's on-site. I do think there are nuances to it that might allow you to build some of it off-site, but in general, from what I've seen, it's on-site.
How do you see the effect of co-living?
I see it as just another idea of creating space within an environment where people can share the expense and cost of those units. I'd like to touch a little bit upon the co-living or neighborhoods in general, as you talk about people coming to this country or in this country that need a place to live, and to touch a little bit about my friend Victor in the 30% or 40% rise in rents. The increase in rise of rents and should not be thought of in any way that it creates displacement of tenants from a neighborhood. At least I don't think it's that way. If rents go up in a certain neighborhood, it creates opportunities in other neighborhoods where people who can't afford to stay there, not everybody can live on Park Avenue. Not everybody can live in certain areas. And it's not built for that. It just doesn't work that way. And it's just like a job, no different. You're either qualified for a certain job or you're not just to say, well, you should have the same job as anybody else, qualified or not. So I do believe that if the rents go up in a certain neighborhood and people can't afford to stay there, for whatever those reasons are, it creates affordable rents in another neighborhood. And it changes the neighborhood to become a better and safer place to live. And I really do think that at the end of the day, is what has happened in New York. If you look at Brooklyn and Williamsburg 10 years...
Right, which we were discussing before. We were talking about Prospect Heights. What's happened, the change in the neighborhood, the different areas, the revitalization, the millennials coming in, the changes have had a positive effect.
Yeah, and as Victor said, he's of the thought pattern that you build out of a problem, or build out of build affordable. But are we truly building affordable when the affordable housing formula actually has people paying just a little bit less than what the non-affordable component in the same construction building is paying? So it's not like they're getting something. The only thing that's happening there is that a lot of this is being picked up by different subsidies. So I truly believe that a tenant should always have the ability and the belief that they could become an owner, that they can own a piece of the rock, and that not everybody can. And tenants and apartment buildings are built exactly for that reason. Not everyone can.
Right, but if you look today, we're talking about the rents going up, we're talking the population growing up, but the number of buildings that are being converted to co-ops or condominiums, I haven't seen that many taking place, right, Frank?
That's something that grew out of the early 1980s, and it began rather speculative, but it actually turned out to be a wonderful investment. But getting back to Joe's comment about affordability and Victor's about the average rent, I think you have to look at the market in two different sectors. There's one which is the regulated housing, and there's one which is the free market housing. And somewhere in the middle, those two cross hands as units become deregulated. But the rent-regulated housing stock, although it has been shrinking, it's still very affordable.
Right.
I think the average one-bedroom rent is somewhere around $1,100 throughout all of New York City. The two bedrooms may be around $1,400. So
Right, but
they haven't seen that
it's
40%.
okay, but it's skewed because of the different neighborhoods.
But if you think about the rent-regulated stock, nobody's in jeopardy of being evicted under a rent-stabilized occupancy because of the automatic renewals on their rents. So, there's a slower rental growth in that particular marketplace. So whether you're living on East 34th Street in Manhattan or East 34th Street in Brooklyn, you're protected under those laws, and you can only have the maximum permissible increase during any particular rent cycle. So the housing stock was established, I guess in 72, 73, when rent stabilization came in, somewhere around there.
Took over the other.
It's been well protected. And I think what's helped that housing stock over the past 50 years is the owner's ability to invest in his property, to improve his property. And along with those improvements comes an increase in rents. So I think when you're talking about the market, you have to talk about new development, and you have to talk about the existing housing stock.
Where are you seeing the largest increase of demand for people to invest?
I would say in general, they are in the workforce housing locations throughout the city. I think within that category, Inwood is receiving a lot of traction, and that's partially relating to the rezoning. It's also pretty much all in an opportunity zone. All of Inwood is pretty much an opportunity zone, which is bringing a lot of increased activity and capital attention to those neighborhoods. I think there's areas throughout Queens that are doing very well, Jackson Heights, things like that. Bronx has been performing well over the past 5 years.
But Frank and Joe was saying they've been involved with the Bronx for 30 years, okay, as a lender and so on. Okay, it's a stable market. It's a workforce housing. People like it over there. It's relatively convenient to Manhattan, so it works. So anything that's really been near transit-oriented development, has done well. And even like the Rockaways, we were talking before about you as a banker, lending money in the Rockaways, okay, because the neighborhood has changed. Rockaways for 20 years, nothing happened, okay? The big question right now is, the mayor has announced plans for the ferries to go to Coney Island. That may change the world also on what's happening over there. You look at different markets in different categories. Where do you think the greatest opportunity is an owner? Put your owner hat today on.
I happen to like Queens. I love Queens. I think Queens is great. I think it has a very eclectic group of people that live there. Very diversified. It's a good, hard-working class. The work ethics in the area is very, very good. I think that, a matter of fact, if you look at statistics, I think Long Island City has the most apartments that are coming online as new construction.
Yeah, they have about 22,000 rental apartments coming on. I did a show on it. There aren't that many condominium units in Long Island City, point one. And point two, the people who are buying the units are not people working for Amazon. A number of them were people who were living in Flushing who want to have the opportunity of owning an investment property in Long Island City. It's a different phenomena as the papers were bringing it out. They weren't bringing it out appropriately. But what about another section of Queens, near Aqueduct Racetrack, where nothing has really taken place for years?
It's a predominantly residential neighborhood. So
right.
Accumulating any parcels of substance to develop would be particularly challenging. There's some industrial zones that may have some potential going forward. But I think the biggest talk really is what's going to go on in the racetrack. Building the new stadium, getting the
it's-
transportation hub going.
I think it's typically lower density there, to your point, right? You don't see the same type of zoning that would allow for higher, taller, larger developments that you do.
But
in other
in
areas.
order to meet the demand of all the people coming here, you need higher density. I mean, we're not building additional land, okay? We don't have Battery Park City where we have a landfill because we built the World Trade Center. I mean, someone said to me, probably the best opportunity in Queens is if they put a platform over the Sunnyside Yards. I mean, it's a
Being
huge...
discussed.
Right, I know, but because look at the density over there, and if you look at what happened in Hudson Yards over here, you're creating the additional housing. And even though it's luxury housing, but due to the mandatory affordability complex, there is 25% affordable housing all over there in new developments taking place around the city. So where do you see the challenges as a banker with regard to the residential market in general in 2019?
I think there's a good feeling that we're going to see some sort of pause in interest rate increases. I don't know that that's immediate, but there is a less of a concern about interest rates moving higher than there was a month ago. I know in November we were looking at saying 5 was the new 4, and someone said to me the other day that 4 is the new 5. So it's just kind of a wait and see what happens. We have an election year coming up. I don't know that if anything happens, it'll happen between now and June, and probably not likely after June because of the election year. I think banks are just going to be cautiously optimistic. Listen, we don't make money unless we invest in our communities, and that's really what we're all trying to do, is to make our city one of the best cities in the world, and just kind of keep attracting as many jobs and as many young people as we can.
Joe, as a banker, where do you see the opportunities in the world in 2019?
I think that, from a banker, a community banker like we are and Frank's bank is as well, I still believe that the reinvestment inside the communities that we represent and support is where we're going to make our best business. And we know the people, we know the communities, and the communities really do need a small community bank. Large banks, as much as they want to portray themselves as being for the community, and in some cases there are many things that both First Central or Flushing can't provide a certain clientele. They just can't. And then again, there's a lot of things that we can get very close to providing that the larger banks do, and that's the hands-on hand-holding and building that relationship. So I think there's a lot of opportunities still being done that way.
So now I ask you, as an owner, where are your opportunities in 2019?
I think on the real estate side, my family is, we're long-term holders. We've invested in the Bronx as well as other boroughs, always with the intention of holding it long-term, building up building the rents up, fixing the properties, maintaining them, becoming a part of that community. So I think that I still see that as a play. To say, am I ready and looking at a deal today if it came up? In all honesty, I'm taking a step back personally to see where legislation goes. Because for 30 years, 35 years, we're in a regulated business, no different than the banking business. But the banking difference has a very different component. The banking industry is regulated and has a fiduciary responsibility to its depositor. That's where it gets its money. So its responsibility is that it's safe and sound in making their investments in order not to lose that. So they need to be very strongly regulated. The real estate industry, investors use their own capital. They invest their own capital, and yet, for whatever reason, it continues to be under scrutiny and attack that it can't raise rents to be at a certain level. We need agencies to tell us how to do that business. Meanwhile, the grocery store and any other company doesn't have that component. They're not in a position to say, you can't raise your stock. Wall Street runs with a stock market, even though it's overseen and regulated, but it does run through a market. The real estate industry or the multifamily industry, the rent stabilized, there's always an agency that's there because they continue to say that this business is in an emergency. It's in an emergency state. For 50, 60 years, it's been under an emergency.
But even though it's an emergency, what do you see for 2019 in the sales business?
In terms of opportunities,
Yeah.
I feel that for all the reasons that we discussed and all the topics we discussed, I feel that groups and capital that can take a more opportunistic approach in 19 and even going forward into.
What do you mean by an opportunistic
Where
approach?
they're not handcuffed by having an investment fit within a certain box and hit all the check marks, where they can look at all different product types, they can play on or participate on different parts of the capital stack. They could come in, help a multifamily value-add investor that has debt coming due in 2020 and is struggling with their takeout. They could come in and stabilize the capital stack for another 5-7 years.
Are we
maybe.
seeing more foreign investors coming back to the USA?
It changed last year, and I think it's the same as last year at this point.
Why did it change? The Asian?
Yes, I think the increased regulation on their in China specifically has definitely put a dent in the influx of capital from that sector of the market.
So since my apple is over there as opposed to me holding it on here, I'd say it's relatively, there's a little clouds. We don't have all the answers yet. We don't know what interest rates are going to be. We don't know what community groups are going to have. We don't know what the legislature is going to change. But we know that people want to live in New York, and we are going to live in New York. There are opportunities, but we also have to be aware of the clouds in the air. I'd like to thank my friend Mr. Pistelli,
Thank you, Michael.
Victor,
you.
Frank, and I'll see you next week.